Okay, call the meeting to order for the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission, April 12, 2018. All right, roll call of voting members. Keith Allgood.
Present.
Donna Boggs, absent. Tony Campbell.
Here.
Gary Corlew.
Here.
Tom Cullen.
Here.
Tony Gross.
Here.
Leanne Ferguson is absent. Mike Patnode here. Chuck Slater.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum, non-voting staff, Sharon Armstrong. Here. John Lawless.
Here.
Jennifer No.
Here.
Okay, thank you. So we have a quorum. We have also with you the meeting minutes from March 8th in your packet.
I move we approve the minutes from March 8th as circulated.
Okay,
Second.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved from March 8th. You also have today's meeting agenda.
Move to approve the minutes from April 12th.
Or the agenda.
The agenda.
Oh, you're on the agenda?
Yeah, for April 12th.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you move to approve the agenda. Okay,
Yeah.
we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the agenda's approved. There's no old business. And on new business, the first is a concept review of proposed development, West Kingston Springs Road, map 96K, Group B, parcel 56, Indian Point Partners, and there is a lot of enclosures, and there is a report. There's a report by our planner in there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the second presentation by Mr. Francis and his group. He has agreed tonight to present this as a concept plan rather than seeking approval. I did the review along with Mr. Reisner on the proposed project, and there are several issues that we've advised the applicant that he will need to address. One of those is that this parcel, and I think there's a large map, and if it's not circulating its way around a large plat, I'll be happy to share this one as well. Making its way around the room. This particular tract we know as parcel 56, that was the subject of the PUD overlay several months ago, along with several other properties within Kingston Springs, is also present in a PUD for the bluffs of the carpet that was approved. I think the plan process started in 1988. That PUD overlay was approved in 1994. There was an HOA and a development agreement that was done in 1994 with a 20-year lifespan and an automatic renewal. So this property exists under that PUD. In 2003, there was a subsequent agreement signed. I believe developers or ownership changed. In 2003, another agreement for the covenants and restrictions was signed on May 8th. So at this point, it is still a part of the bluff of the carpet. So in order for this project to proceed, there are several things that we're going to need to address. One is we've asked the developer to provide us with a geotech report for the differences in disturbance of the ground. He has agreed to do that. The secondary thing that we're going to need is we're going to need some evidence by the HOA that they're willing to either de-annex this or approve the proposed plan as a part of the bluff of the harvest before we can proceed. Because there is an existing HOA on paper, there is an existing plan of development and an existing PUD overlay. The next thing that would happen then is, depending on the outcome of that process, if they de-annex it from the bluffs of the Harpeth and it's brought back to the Planning Commission, then you will proceed as though it's a new PUD, totally new development with no connection to the previous development plan. If that process does not occur and there's no agreement to de-annex, then it will become a part of the bluffs of the Harpeth, and there will need to be an affirmative vote for the members of the HOA to accept this development because it has a change in density and in the overall PUD plan for the original development of the bluffs of the Harpeth. So that's the circumstance of the property as it sits right now. There will also need to be, if it moves forward from those processes, then the developer will need to negotiate an agreement with this body for presentation to the city commission for the circumstances of development. The plan that you have before you right now cannot be developed as it sits, even if it's de-annexed and started as a new PUD, because the density is too high and the lot sizes won't accommodate that for the base zoning of R2. So have I confused anybody yet?
Yeah.
So in order for this to move forward, one, the planning commission, you are the negotiative body with the developer for the level of density and what will be tolerated and what will not. You would have to agree as a body to accept a higher density for the property itself if it moves forward. So where it sits right now is we have a proposed plan of development. We need a geotech report, and I think Mr. Francis can share with us where he is on that. We need some sort of interaction with the HOA and the Bluffs of the Harpeth PUD plan in order to either incorporate this density of development within it with their approval or de-annex it and start it as Indian Point, one or the other. I see everybody still with me so far. I'm checking your
The
faces.
compaction tests are on the Indian Point, the commercial property out by the highway.
I'm sorry.
The compaction tests that are necessary are on the 2 lots that are on Kingston Springs Road.
The 5 commercial lots, all of the lots, and there's some confusion with the language of the covenant that David and I have worked through. The covenants and restrictions indicate that there are 5 lots. There was, right, some assumption that those may have included the commercial lots, which are also numbered 1 through 5 on the front. They are not part of that PUD process. We have checked the original development document and the plat. So all of them were included under a PUD draft in 1994. In 2003, a subsequent PUD agreement for covenants and restrictions was signed by Mr. Francis, saying that all of them would be developed under that original plan of development. This is distinct and different from that plan of development.
I understand that, but he's, as I thought I heard you say, he's got to get compaction tests on, is that the 2 commercial lots? Okay, thanks.
Is that part of this geotech report requirement?
It is not. The only thing that was submitted on the commercial lots, lots 4 and 5, was a through access to this lot for the purposes of development.
Right.
It is distinct, but that, without having a destination, so to speak, then that stands as an access easement that does not go to an approved development at this point. And with that, if you have questions, I'll be...
So geotech, I'm just trying to make sure I got it. Geotech report requirement,
Yes.
Carl knows that. HOA arrangement, that needs to be resolved. And then there is the density negotiation.
And the density question is absorbed by this body. You're in charge of plat approval or non-approval.
Right.
The agreement for development, as far as street layouts, water, sewer, all of that, is for the city commission. So in that instance, you're a recommending body. The developer will present a plan of development that will lay out what he wants to do. For those of you who have not been through a PUD process, and I know several of you have in other jurisdictions, it's a negotiated contract between the planning commission and the developer. And the developer asks for what he would like to have. You decide what can be done and what is feasible, and you negotiate that process out, and it's reduced to writing. And then this body will sign an agreement to allow whatever that is, whatever negotiative agreement that you come to.
Is the Bluffs of the Harpeth HOA alive and well?
I have
That's what I'm sorry.
absolutely no idea.
I mean, is it, does it need?
Functional.
I have no idea. I know that it had a life of perpetuity in the original covenants and restrictions of 20 years with an automatic renewal. There were circumstances of the establishment of the HOA laid out in the covenants and in the HOA document. So I don't know the answer to that question.
if this is a non-existent body, then what does that, I mean, if that HOA is, and what does that do to the process? Which I,
It makes it
Very well
somewhat
may.
complex, because the Kingston Springs Planning Commission approved the build-out of the Bluffs of the Harpeth. The document on its face states that in order to gain approval for the development of the Bluffs of the Harpeth, the developer agreed to the covenants and restrictions in the establishment of the HOA. So if the HOA was never established, that's a violation of the agreement between the Planning Commission and the developer. So if it's defunct, and I don't know that it is or it isn't, that's a question for the developer. If it's defunct, then the Planning Commission will have to take some action to negate the requirement for that HOA in an existing built-out partially subdivision, which makes things very complicated.
Wouldn't they have to reestablish the, I'm
Yes,
really
if
would be
there's an
surprised if it doesn't still exist. I think Lori's brother was president of it. I don't know what the situation is now.
To proceed with this particular development that you have in front of you, if there's no existing HOA, then there's no body to accept or not accept from an HOA perspective for the change to the density of development. We had a similar issue in Pleasant View some years ago with Westridge, because the developer never formally established an HOA. He left the covenants and restrictions in place, but he never established a mechanism for votes or that sort of thing, and then he passed away. And the person that took over development and the management of that particular subdivision allowed the business license and a number of other things to lapse. So it's kind of a question that's come up a couple times in that neighborhood as to whether they're bound by covenants and restrictions or not. And that came up because of an empty lot somebody wanted to develop.
I would think it's in the best interest of the city to make sure that that HOA does function, because that has a lot of impact on what happens up there. If the road falls apart, that's not city streets. Are you listening, Assistant City Manager?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think the only, as with most HOAs, they're supposed to be kind of self-replicating, and the city really doesn't govern them. But you made that a requirement, or this body, the Planning Commission of Kingston Springs made that a requirement for the purposes of development.
And so one last question.
Sure.
Tony brought up commercial lot compaction
Is that still an
discussion. Is that part of this conversation?
It is. In order for the lots to be developed, we have to ensure that the access along with parcel 54 are stable for development. That is done with compaction, it's done with a geotech report. Mr. Francis, I believe, furnished one. The last one in 2003, there was a PSI report done, I believe is what he told us in the meeting that we had in John's office the other day. So it's a commonly done thing when ground is graded, topography is changed, compaction takes place. There's an engineering standard of a 95% proctor, which has to do with compaction, that ensures that the ground is stable. We also have some blue line stream interaction on this lot, and we need to make sure that we're not disturbing a blue line stream, because TDOT takes a very dim view of that.
So the blue,
all the rocks on that lot ought to make sure that it's compacted.
I just didn't hear that in the checklist of things that needed to be done.
For the compaction, the geotech report
Will require
requires
Okay, so
boring and
that's part
testing
of
and
it.
compaction. Geotech is a very specific thing, and they're done for various reasons. In this
Okay.
particular case, it's for the disturbance of ground, evidence of fill, so that we can make sure that the ground is stable before
Okay.
it's built upon.
Okay, thank you.
This is for both the area of the condos plus the commercial, the entryway out front.
That is
Not only
correct.
the entryway.
One of the requirements of a geotech report is that you establish the limit of land disturbance. So in order to do that, boring is done to a particular depth so that you know where the edge of any interaction with the ground exists and whether it's natural terrain, so it would interact with all of the lots.
Okay. So at this point, we are simply hearing a concept with no, and we're not doing anything other than hearing, right?
There's no request nor availability to have a vote. Right
At this
now,
point in
Mr.
time.
Francis is simply having a conversation with you, how he sees the development of this property.
Okay. So,
Can I address the body?
in just a second, hey, everybody good to go? Everybody good to move forward? Okay, please.
Okay. One, the issue with the Bluffs of the Heart with an HOA, I just found out about yesterday by a phone call. Now, originally, when the plat was approved for the 5 lots, we basically vacated. Bluffs of the Harpeth at one time was twice the lots that it is now. There was a plat submitted, and I've still got a copy of it somewhere, but they had presented their plat that was approved by the Planning Commission to do all that high-density development. And then they had a secondary plan for additional lots once those lots were sold. Well, I came in here and asked for a vacating of those lots. Lance Smith signed a document. Y'all requested a document at that point in time for him to sign, saying that they had no issues with me combining those half-acre lots into a 10-acre lot, a 12-acre lot, an 8-acre lot, a 5-acre lot, and a 15-acre lot. I've got to find that document. I don't know where it's at, but Lance did sign that, you know, because y'all asked for that, and y'all would not have voted for me to basically condense those smaller lots into larger lots, okay? So, since I just found out yesterday, I'm gonna try to track that down, or I'm gonna go by and try to see Lance in the next couple of days and to see if he remembers where it's at and what we had, you know. But they did agree to it because they were not going to see the rest of the subdivision built out as the original subdivision was with the smaller tracts. 2, on the compaction test, we did, when the lots were being filled, we proof rolled every other day, just like you're supposed to. PSI tested all of the lots. The results were sent to the city through 2006 or 2007, I'm not sure which year. I know that John said that he might have looked for them. Did you ever look for them to see if you could find
I did.
them?
I found phase 1 documentation, but I've not found anything else.
Okay.
I need to I'll pull the minutes from the plan.
Well, I called PSI, their records only go back 10 years. So basically, I'm outside of that. But to retest, it's not that expensive. I've got a track hole on site out there. They'll come back out and test. I have to dig pits in specific areas. And of course, what she's concerned about is the road going in that will serve the 15 acres. I assume that's your main concern.
For the purposes of the development of not only the commercial lots, Mr. Francis, but also Lot 56, they will need to establish the limit of all land disturbance so that they know exactly how much land has been changed since the last period of report that you furnished to the Planning Commission, I believe was in 2003, is that correct?
No, it was actually, the last PSI report that was submitted was 2006, because when Dr. Anderson was building his building in 2006 and 2007, PSI was out there numerous times testing. So, but I wasn't privileged to the final test results on Lot 3, which the medical building is, since I didn't build the building. But on the subway building, which I built in 2006, we actually, Ms. Cooper required us that when we dug the footing for the monolithic slab, I had to have tests run for the footing. Now, those results were shipped to the city. And I might could find them, might not could find them. But rather than look, PSI is not that expensive. You know, and like I say, they'll come out and they'll spot, you'll dig test holes, certain depths, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, and they'll run their proctors in there and their instruments in there to determine how it is. As Tony made as a joke there, the dump trucks come in with the rock. I mean, basically, proof rolling with a loaded dump truck is the way you compact soil. I mean, your greatest compaction is you cross compact and you star compact. And that's how you do it.
So
mean,
I have So, when Mr. Francis is talking about PSI tests, I heard you talking about a core drill. Are we talking about different things?
Parts and elements of the same thing.
Okay.
A core drill is done, it pulls soil. It checks the density and the compaction of that soil. Geotech is a civil engineering firm, so is boring and compaction.
Okay.
Once those cores are pulled, then the engineer can calculate how much weight and compaction is necessary in order to stabilize the ground for the purposes of development. Filling ground in and of itself is not an issue as long as you control soil and erosion and runoff.
And moisture.
But filling the ground for the purposes of building, in order to support a building development, to hold foundations, to install infrastructure, utilities, is a very different process. The other issue that we want to make sure that we address while we're doing this is that there is blue line stream present on the lot. And I want to make sure that we don't have any interaction at all with the blue line stream. Those are heavily regulated. They require ARAP permits to disturb. If you're familiar with the parcel under discussion by the county to purchase for the jail that's been the subject of so much news coverage, that parcel was the subject of multiple violations from TDAC for disturbing blue line streams. It started in 2006 and it was finally adjudicated in 2015. So it's something we just want to avoid. It takes a very specific process to disturb that.
You
So
consider the
what-
blue line stream to be the drainage at the back of the two commercial lots.
Blue line streams are distinct in
I
that,
understand what blue line
for
streams are.
their edification though, they're distinct in that it's not like walking up Sycamore Creek where it's visible. Blue line streams are usually present under the ground, and that body of water continues to move. So if you don't have stability on top of it, the water will continue to take out the base layer underneath. So it's important that
How
we
deep are
have
the core drills?
It's be based on whatever Pittsburgh testing requests. I mean, when we were building the lots originally, of course, they came out every 3 to 5 days, and of course, we only made a lift of 1.5 to 2 foot over a period of a week
Yeah,
because
but
we
if
were
we've got
covering.
an underground stream there, it may be 15 or 20 feet down.
Well, no, it would be 80 or 90 feet down because the fields are 80 foot. And we basically bridged over anything anyway. I mean, you bridge after 30 foot anyway. So, but anyway, I mean, I don't mind getting PSI back out to test it. I have no problem with that, because especially with the road bed going in there and everything, that's no problem doing that. And as I say, we'll have a machine there to dig the pits for them to test anyway. You know, other than that, I mean, the biggest thing to me is this HOA thing blindsided me. I didn't really understand that. But I do know that when Lance signed off on it up there back whenever we did this, I don't know, what's the date on that plat?
2002, 2003.
2002, 2003, they basically gave up their rights to us doing anything. Because you've got the Ferguson that built the house up there and they, you know. So the process was then, you just pull a building permit and move on. So,
Well, the thing is, Carl, I hope that we can you can work with the staff, with our planner and assistant city manager, to get all this stuff done up front so we don't have any misunderstanding.
Right.
Through this process.
Well, as long as I know what I'm looking at, I mean, it's kind of like climbing steps. You know, you got 10 steps climbed, and when you get to the 10th step, you got 10 more to climb. So I got to know up front what I'm being asked to do.
You and I've been climbing these steps for
A lot of
40
years, Tommy. Yeah, yeah. But you keep kicking me down, so. But we'll get the HOA thing. I'll get it looked at, and I'll call Lance and see what's going on with it. And I don't know that I can find any records that are 10 or 12 years old. I mean, it's just virtually impossible. That's why I agreed to go ahead and do the PSI testing again, because finding them and locating them is just, and they don't have them, because when I called, the lady just kind of laughed and said, "Sir, we don't keep them." She said, "Now we do, because everything is on PDF." But back then, it was still just done manually, you know.
So now what we have before us tonight is just your proposal.
Yeah, basically, we're just gonna do it. I mean, you know, the road comes in. the
You brought this
clubhouse-
before, something similar to this.
Yeah, but this time, this is concrete. These dimensions are right. You got your contours on there. I know that there was a question Ms. Armstrong had about, this is R2 now, correct? I want to make sure I understand
R2
this. And then y'all got to change it to R3, which is the next.
Not necessarily. What they have done, and I think you and I had a conversation about PUDs and the way they function.
Right.
With a PUD, they can establish higher density in one area of a development in order to accommodate a build-out, and lower density in another area, or require the rest of it to be reserved as open space without changing the underlying zone. That's why PUDs are so useful to governance. As an example, Vantage Point in Ashland City was accomplished through a PUD. Mr. Wilkinson wanted high density in one area of that development for the apartments. He wanted lower density in other areas, and the overlay of the PUD allows them to change the density. There is a baseline below which they cannot go, which is 8,000 square feet. And that has nothing to do with their lack of desire. That's what it takes to put the infrastructure in and the separation of buildings for fire codes and a number of other things. So they have the flexibility with a PUD overlay to accomplish that without changing the base zoning for the surrounding properties. That's why PUDs are useful.
So, John, why did I bring back $150 for item number
But you
B?
can,
Rezone from R2 to R3, so that's,
to answer that question for you, Mr. Francis, in order for you to accomplish this, having a base underlay of R3 assist them in doing that, because you want to have connected buildings with garages. So it's easier to fit the model that you want to accomplish in an R3 zone for them, and it doesn't apply directly in the face of R2 zoning, because you want rear garages and you want to put 2 structures on one lot, but without a traditional duplex model. So R3 will help you to accomplish your goal easier than R2 will. But that is a decision that they can guide you on.
So this is not correct then?
Pardon?
This is not correct?
It has nothing to do with whether it's correct or incorrect.
Well, I know, but if you've got other structures, this is basically the same as you presented 2 years ago.
no, he actually drew this with the anticipation of you rezoning to R3.
Well, this is,
With
I
a
mean,
higher
there's still
density.
26 units, I think you proposed when you originally came in.
Well, there's 24, actually, there's 48 there now. Yeah, I wanted to do 52, but we couldn't get them in there. We couldn't squeeze them in. So,
But basically, Carl, of what the PUD does, it gives the opportunity for the planning commission and the developer to work together, figure out what's
Right.
the best for tract of land.
But based on him paying to get it changed, is that something that we'll have to do? That's probably what he's asking there.
Yeah, exactly.
We could vote on it.
My advice to him, seeking the change in density
Right.
that he wants, is to seek R3 zoning.
Right.
The PUD will allow you to work with this application without having someone next door filing the same
Right.
rezoning request, because PUDs are treated specially and differently than traditional zoning. So you have footprints you have to stay in, he has footprints he has to stay in. So that was the purpose of filing the R3 rezoning application.
What are the A units?
I'm sorry. Those are 1,800 square foot. The singles will be 1,800 foot, the joint ones will be 1,600 foot. 1,800 foot is 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath, 1,600 foot are 2 bedroom, 2 bath.
Where's this lot 56 you were talking about?
Lot 56 is this. This is
The
lot
whole thing.
56.
The
It's
whole
parcel
thing?
56.
The 15.10 acres.
I thought it was called 5.
I don't know, sir.
So with all these others, you have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On that lot 2 that got bigger, there's a house on it now, right?
Correct.
And so did they have to be, are they part of the HOA with the other Bluffs of the Hartwood? We don't know. We don't know.
There is a homeowner association.
We don't know how that all came
They actually
about.
have a management company.
Well, that's right, I've seen
They
the
have a
sign.
management company. Yeah, they do
But
have a
but
management
is
company.
Debbie's sister's place,
Yeah,
is
like
that
last time I
part of
talked
the
to-
HOA?
Last time I talked to Teresa, they were not paying any fees, because, again, when Lance and I signed off on all this, and he agreed to us vacating all the small lots and making 5 big lots, I said, I don't want to be part of Bluffs of Hartman. He said, well, that's fine, because we're not doing anything to, in fact, affect his infrastructure, you know.
I just want to make sure that when we walk out of here 2 or 3 months from now, everybody is satisfied that we've done what we should do, and we can come on without a bunch of problems. Does that work for you?
Everybody be satisfied except you, Tom.
To address the HOA briefly, if I might, the HOA cannot be defunct unless there's a vote of 2/3 of membership to render it defunct. So if there is a document in existence that contains that, then obviously someone needs to provide it. We've been unable to locate one of the city's documents.
Sharon, they're collecting money up there, because I sold a lot to somebody that pulled a building permit that's basically finishing up, and they had to pay a transfer fee of $350 from the lot from us to them, and then they had to pay their first year's dues up front before they would sign off on their architectural approval form.
If there is an existing HOA structure, it would be prudent for the applicant to pull that membership together and have this discussion with them.
I think actually Lance can do it, if he's
Well,
still
he might be
president.
able to.
Lance can, he was the one that signed everything before, I'm sorry?
Lance is still the resident.
Is he? Okay, well then I'll go see him.
So
Is there any
basically, you're
questions?
saying that they're collecting dues every year from all these houses up there?
Yes, sir.
Well,
Yes.
They've got a management company,
They have
the
a
sign's
management
right there as you go in.
we can't.
They pay him 25%.
Is the management company effectively the HOA then?
No.
No, Lance is it. Lance runs the show.
That's what I'm asking, you know, if they're paying dues every year, then obviously they should have a HOA that's functioning.
I think they probably do.
Well, specifically with regard to the HOA contains covenants and restrictions and the way that membership is held and how votes are taken. For the purposes of the applicant's request, this development as proposed either A, remains a part of the Bluffs of the Harpeth with a 2/3 vote of the membership, or B, a 2/3 vote of the membership to de-annex it from the Bluffs of the Harpeth. That's the city's stake in this particular thing, and then you have to vote as a body to allow amendment of the original PUD agreement and amendment of the original plat to reflect whatever that outcome is.
So we had a conversation on a different piece of land about zoning and PUDs and the idea of rezoning something when the PUD didn't exist. And all of a sudden, there's a piece of land that has new zoning, but there's really no negotiated PUD. So is there a sequence that happens together?
There is.
Is that a city street or-
We
No, it's
advised
private.
Mr.
So
Francis
city
that
density,
seeking
the HOA's gotta be
rezoning would
bigger.
make the density of the PUD
And they're
easier
there
to
too.
accomplish.
Okay.
There's a limitation of insult to the underlying base zone that has to be addressed to increase that density. It is much easier to accomplish this under an R3 zoning without corrupting the base zone than it is under an R2.
Okay,
we
so we'll
advised him.
be advised on following that sequence, so we don't end up,
Absolutely.
okay? All right.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to get this where we can come back next month, because we just keep pushing it out farther and farther. And so if I go to the HOA and I get PSI, but do I have to have the PSI test for y'all to rezone? Is that critical?
Any action that, and I apologize for interrupting, but for this body's edification, you cannot take affirmative action on a plan of development without satisfying all the requirements that come before that approval. And one of those requirements is the geotech report, because if you approve moving forward with a plan of development, and then it turns out later that the ground is not stable or there's some interaction with the blue line stream, you can be held accountable as a body for taking that action.
So we need two things to consider. We need the geotech report, and we need the report of the HOA determination, right? We need the
They either
records.
de-annex it or agree to accept this as a proposed
Right.
plan of development for the existing Bluffs of
Right,
Harpeth.
so we need a record that clearly states that.
You
for
said
the
you need a
HOA.
2/3 vote either way, is that right?
Yes, it is a 2/3 vote of the membership. It requires that in order to have a majority for an HOA. That's what the covenants and restrictions, they're different from project to project, but this particular one has a 2/3 requirement.
So they need 2/3 of the people to vote, or they need 2/3 to vote one way?
2/3 of the membership of the HOA, which
Right.
is 2/3 of the property owners
Right.
that currently
That's all they
own
need.
property.
They need to vote, just, but he
Yes.
doesn't have to have 2/3 of them vote one way or the other. Okay,
correct.
perfect. So whatever the majority is from there, okay.
So majority as long as 2/3 vote, okay.
You and Carl understand now, or he understands what you're expecting in the geotech report.
If he does not, I'll be happy to furnish that. We've done so for another applicant. There is a process by which they're done that is an engineering standard.
But you're talking about something more than just those two lots at the front.
The geotech report will be based on boring to establish the limit of land disturbance, wherever that limit is.
Fill-ins.
That's correct. So once the engineer goes in the field, he is ethically bound to establish where the limits
Neil's
of
doing
the interaction takes place, and then to determine the stability of the ground that has been
I
erected.
just want to make sure that, you know,
Yes,
I've
sir.
watched Carl do a lot of digging up there for the last couple of years.
Well, to your point, Carl, you know, you want to come back and do this, so the trick is, we have a city planner, and whatever comes back needs to be right, and
Right.
that's kind of where we're at, so if there's any misunderstanding, that will delay it.
Well, I'm just gonna get Neil, Neil Westerman is my engineer, and so I'm just gonna let him do it and let him contact PSI, and because that's who he uses too.
Well, you know, I think we all relatively enthusiastic about the concept, or I certainly. I'm too damn old to know this.
Okay?
Can't afford it either.
Well, the longer it delays, the more expensive it gets.
That's the problem.
Building costs are escalating so dramatically right now.
If I might, TDEC has changed the framework for its data viewer, and I have requested that Mr. Francis provide me with a clearance letter from a case that was closed in 2011, so that we'll have a copy for our records. If you could do that, I need to know the circumstances under which that case was closed.
Okay.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I'll tell you what happened. Of course, they came out there, I had worked on, under the TDOT's, which is Tennessee Department of Transportation's permit. It expired, I didn't pay attention, I just kept going, as Tony always says. And then, so they gave me a choice of paying $37.50 for a corrective action plan, which is a cap, or paying a $1,200 fine. Well, you know me, I wrote the check for $1,200, and they went on their merry way.
Okay.
And it was easy.
So, yeah, are you good? Is-
Yeah, I guess so.
anything else?
Like I say, I'll have Neil doing it, and I didn't know if Steve had anything to say. Steve's the surveyor and one that did all this pretty work here.
Any other questions for Mr. Francis? Or-
One question I have, is there any potential impact of what Mr. Francis is proposing, than what we're gonna hear later from Mr., the next door?
McPherson.
Is
McPherson.
there any impact between the two? Is that your question?
Well, they butt up against one another.
No, no, there's a big holler between us and two little ponds, so we butt up, but there's a big difference in us.
There will be sufficient engineering reports produced on the two distinct proposals for development for us to determine whether or not there will be an interplay between the two.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
All right. So that was, I think, items A and B together, right? We've done both of those?
You can't do the,
Right, I mean, but it was addressed. Okay, so C,
I apologize.
Okay.
We'll touch base.
changing orders. Okay. So are you back in?
I'm back. I'm waiting to get my chair back.
Don't need to tag.
I
didn't know if we needed a high five on the way by.
All right, so this concept of proposed development, item C.
It is. Mr. McPherson came and visited with John and I, what, almost 2 weeks ago? And Mr. McPherson at one point had his property up for sale. He has taken the for sale sign down and has determined that he would like to come back to you with a plan of development for several apartment buildings. We have explained to Mr. McPherson that the property is now working and functioning under the guise of a PUD overlay, that several things would be required. One, he requested a grading permit. We explained to him that a grading permit would not be available to him until we received a geotech report that reports to us the land disturbance that's happened, the soil moving that's happened, the grading that's happened on the property, and whether or not what's already there is stable enough to do any further grading and groundwork in pursuit of development. So that's where we left it with him. I had a couple of email exchanges with Mr. McPherson. The last email exchange that I got was last Friday, where he said that he and Mr. Lyon would be producing the engineering report ASAP. So that's where we are with this. His proposal for development includes some apartment buildings. He has not laid out a really specific plat yet, because we have to move through the steps, much as we did on the last project, before we can get there. Mr. Lyon has been very helpful in coming to the meetings and disclosing his client's desires. And unless you have questions of me, this is very similar to most land disturbing activity projects. We're going to follow the steps as we need to follow them in order to get where we need to go.
So the next step's a report on the land.
Pardon?
The next step is a report on the soils.
That is correct.
Okay.
Same thing for both.
Yes.
All right.
And next step.
So is there anything else we have to do on this?
Nothing for, the body has no particular vote or motion on this, but I think Mr. Lyon may have some comments for you. We have taken the position that because of the amount of dirt moving activity that's been present on the property, that we are not willing, from a planning perspective, to move forward until we know the condition of the ground. So that's where we are. We are not requiring them to landscape, we're not requiring them to do anything in particular. However, it would be really nice, and Mr. McPherson indicated that he would not be opposed to just clearing up the front of the lot some, so it's not so visible from the road, which was the subject of a code enforcement action because of weeds and a number of other things. So that's kind of where we are with this project as well.
Good evening.
Good luck.
Everybody duck.
Yeah.
That's a wasp.
Come in.
All right, Josh, don't make him mad.
Not gonna bother. Good evening. My name is Josh Lyon. I'm Mr. McPherson's civil engineer. I am not his geotechnical engineer, but we're in the process of acquiring a geotech that I've worked with for some time now on several other projects. So we're as fast as we can, as busy as everybody is, so we're moving in that speed to acquire, to get all that set up. And I would be meeting the geotech out there and establishing that. He does have the guidelines that Ms. Armstrong has provided that the city requires, and knows exactly what to supply in that report to ensure whatever compaction has taken place is adequate to support the facilities that Mr. McPherson wants to construct. So, existing, it was, I believe we started on this 2 years ago. It was commercial in the front and residential in the back. Since then, Mr. McPherson has come back and would like to do all residential. On the front side, he would like to do a 3-story nice complex, a lot more green open space, possible playground. If you've seen the last rendition for phase 1, phase 2 would be the middle section, and phase 3 would be the last one with some, I believe, quadplexes of similar. There's a lot of topography issues on this site, so we're very limited the density we can provide on this, just due to that reason. And we're around 4.5 units per acre currently with our current design layout. So,
If I might, that will, Mr. McPherson does not wish to develop the front portion of the property as commercial, so he will at some point be seeking to rezone that to residential.
The front part, along the road?
Adjacent to the road, that is correct. That's what Josh is referring to when he's saying, or Mr. Lyon is referring to when he's saying he wants to do a setback of some open space and some other things on the front of the parcel, have open and green space, and then set the apartments that he's proposing further back, and then not have commercial development there. We've explained to him, as we do all applicants, that with subdivision development, you're required to do a traffic study. We provided the TPR that was done for Kingston Springs several years ago, and the traffic information study that Thornton's did to both applicants so that they could incorporate that traffic information in their calculations as well. So that we will have kind of a scope from West Kingston Springs down through Leuven Hills for traffic studies.
Will you be in a position when you come back to us, I'd like to see that tract of land, be able to look down on the damn thing and see just what the plans, when he came here first, you know, he had a little bit up front, and he was gonna do something back here. And we talked to him about doing a PUD. He just flat said no and walked off.
Right. He originally agreed to it, but he came back the next meeting.
Yes,
So-
and then, you know, he turned somebody with a bulldozer loose up there that just tore the hell out of the place.
Right.
Really disturbed me.
Right. And he has since is moving on to a different contractor. So we're working on getting all that state permitting caught up with this new contractor. In the meantime, is getting with the geotech report and all that in place.
I could have told him, the guy that was doing the bulldozer work, wasn't gonna happen.
So maybe lesson learned, and we can continue and finish out this site. Because we have done a full grading and drainage plan, and the erosion control plan, and got all the state permitting up front. It's been about 2 years ago now when we started this. Majority of that is staying in place. It's just the use in the phase one, the front portion, is being changed what his initial thought was he would like to do.
I'd like to see, you know, a plan for the whole tract of land.
Right. Yeah, we essentially have a overall master plan for the whole tract.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
They have shared that outline with John and I, and Mr. McPherson at this point is amenable to a PUD.
We didn't have any
Well,
choice at
there's
this
an
point,
overlay,
does
but he understands now that while it is a little more complicated than traditional subdivision, it also provides flexibility that's not available any other way.
Right.
Well, that was the basic idea for us proposing this.
Mhm.
It allowed us to sit down and work with them. We'll give you if you give us, and this
Right.
type of thing.
Yeah, but I believe he's understanding that, hopefully, and we're looking at possibly, you know, consolidating the parcels together within that PUD in the same zoning, and just to clean up some easement issues that aren't necessary for the back parcels anymore, so hopefully we can progress.
That will make the flow of the development much better if it's approved, crossing parcel lines and interacting with the division of the 3 tracks will make paperwork complicated, it will make right-of-ways complicated, easements complicated. So combining the 3 lots together with an overall development plan will make things easier for both the planning
That's
commission.
what I was talking to you about beforehand, is I've lived here 40-some years, and I don't understand how that land lays.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand all of the landowners, Joe Downs or Miss Bessie Pack's daughter.
Yeah, essentially, there's several parcels landlocked back
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
It is.
Well, anyhow,
It's
it'd be
landlocked.
nice if we could look
For
at
the
these.
purposes of development,
Okay.
the only way that they can develop the landlocked portion of the property is to establish a right-of-way that is 50 feet wide, runs all the way back to the parcel. So it is, at this point, unless they combine them, or unless they establish a right-of-way under the city's guidelines, that parcel is not available for development because of.
Well, Mr. Downs back there claims that they have easements into their property.
I know this is a small copy, man. I'll show him what I have here. This, I know, this isn't a full size.
Apparently there's some,
It might give you some understanding of
yeah, I don't,
the front portion right here. And then there's just several odd shapes.
yeah, I didn't realize, did you?
What?
That's the way that property's shaped.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be the same thing you have in your packet.
It's clear here.
And as an aside to the planning commission, many properties have easements. And those easements are for individual egress and ingress for the use of the property. But the appellate courts have always taken the position that because you have an easement, doesn't mean you have the script for development. So they leave that to the latitude of the planning commissions and the jurisdictions where it occurs to establish what is a legal right-of-way for the purposes of development. We had a similar issue in Ashland City a few years ago where property was landlocked, and even though they had a prescriptive easement, that easement was not sufficient for development of a residential subdivision because it didn't meet the state's requirements.
Yeah, there are several easements on here that are basically just for legal purposes that are not practical or plausible for access. And that's what we'd like to clean up, you know, the combination of the plot.
Well, I'm just familiar with Catherine Downs. That piece of property sits up there, you go back by the bank to get into it. But they claim there's also a right of way from down behind, what's the lady's house down there?
It really,
Eva Lee's house, coming up there, so.
Hmm.
And they're all family
Mhm.
somehow or other. So, good luck.
So, any other questions on this, or any other?
No, we know our next step of action, so,
Charge.
yeah, we'll go forward, so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Okay, thank you. So, John,
I
is there
got a
anything
question
else?
for you.
Yes, sir.
What is that thing?
I did have one on the
Okay, yeah, thank you. You're welcome. Early.
Yes.
I did have one item that I wanted to update you on. There has been some interaction between the Corps of Engineers and FEMA and Michael Baker Engineering Firm regarding flood maps that were produced in 2016. That interaction through the Floodplain Management Office at the Nashville District has resulted in we are about to get some more new maps. These will be what's known as a limited revision, limited release series. I don't know the timeline yet. I put a call into Phyllis Cole, who's the manager of that department, but it appears that it will affect all the jurisdictions in Cheatham County with the exception of Pleasant View.
Wow.
So,
It's on
imagine
top of the
that.
hill.
I just wanted to give you a heads up that at some point during this process, the city will be receiving maps that come to you first and then to the city commission so that you will have time to review them. My advice is that when that happens, establish a meeting so that we can all go over them and discuss them so that we end up with some usable documents at the end rather than some that are not.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Okay. Anything else?
I move we adjourn.
You got a second?
Maybe we had one.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.